Wiesenthal. We will also speak about, I will shortly speak about Simon Wiesenthal also, because he played a very, very important role in, they had their names because they were all interned in camps. All the, those who are now, those who survived, they are the ones who remembered, and they became the witnesses, and they were the ones, everything happened in a court of law, especially Eichmann's trial has become a very, very sensational and a public awareness. It actually created a public awareness with Holocaust. Why I am going back to the timeline again and again is that, the whole thing ended at 1945, but the very awareness that such a vast scale of slaughter has happened started coming out only at 1960, and only then people really even acknowledged that such a huge slaughter had happened. Even Elie Wiesel writes that when he told somebody that his story, that how people were gassed continuously, they laughed at him. They did not believe. The so-called cultured society were not willing to believe that a cultured society like Germany could gas 6 lakh people. And so he became very quiet. When you see survivors became very, very quiet for a period of time. Or they needed some time to think. They needed some time to recover and do it. And so, but he was actually, this is a very, very fascinating story. Adolf Eichmann's trial, he had escaped to Argentina, and then Israel was out to capture him. But they did not even tell the Argentinian government that they have come to arrest him. He had another name, and he was working in an industry as a foreman. He was in a very, very low-paid job because he wanted only to live. But then there were 4 Israelis. They went and abducted him, and overnight, without even going through proper channels, they abducted him in Argentina, and they brought him right till Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, the trial happened 1960, and Gideon Hausner was the prosecuting attorney of the Israel Supreme Court. And so it is a very famous line that he said, "When I stand before you here, judges of Israel, to lead the prosecution of Adolf Eichmann, I am not standing alone. With me are 6 million accusers." And that gave rise to a lot of articles and even books, because he did not show remorse at all. In the entire, there were also witnesses. Abba Kaufner was a poet. He was a witness, who was a survivor, and he witnessed against him. But all this did not cut any ice with Eichmann. Eichmann, till the end, he said, I don't feel sorry because I was only obeying orders. And so that was all he could tell them. But now, that is the justice. If you go into the justice and trials, you have a lot of anecdotes. The most prominent anecdote is about Adolf Eichmann, because that also served in bringing the Holocaust into public awareness. Till then, till 1960, though this has happened in 1945, for 15 years, the world was in dark as to what has happened. Even when those who ever started speaking about it, people did not believe them. They did not believe that such a inhuman slaughter could have happened. And so they were just quiet. So the next phase, I also said reparation and restitution and claims. It was saying out reparation, and Jewish organizations, 23 Jewish organizations, they organized something called the Claims Conference. This collected and disperses funds for individuals for the rebuilding of Jewish lives. If you are just Germans documented everything. The Jews were very wealthy, and they had all filled their teeth. For filling of teeth today, we have so many things in the dentist thing. In those days, they filled it with pure gold. And so, even as they were sending into concentration camps, the gold from their teeth weighed to some tons, many tons of gold they got just from pulling the teeth from the Germans. So you can imagine the kind of fortune. They were the richest there. The first man who established a bank, Rothschild, they were so rich there. And so but none of the property was given back because it was all taken. It was all stolen. It went into major artworks were stolen. So, but Germany in 1952, it started giving, then the rule has changed and they felt very, very guilty about what has happened. And they started giving back or compensating. Compensation is not a word actually for that, but then 90 billion has been paid by the German government. First, it gave it to Israel because Israel was what took in a lot of refugees in this, and so it gave to Israel. And also, even now, you have in some kind of a compensation for the labor that they did in concentration camps. So this is also a huge area. I'm just glimpse post Holocaust, and now I come to public. As I told you already, this Eichmann trial is what opened the minds of people to what has really happened. And the era of Holocaust awareness, I am quoting from this Holocaust Narratives in the Post-Testimonial Era. It's a very good article. It is available. It's for free download. Normally, you don't get good articles for free download. I have given you an exhaustive bibliography at the end. So if you are interested, you can go into it. The era of Holocaust awareness, inaugurated by the direct witnesses in the Nuremberg trials between 1945 and 1949, and in Adolf Eichmann's trial, set the ground for the time of testimony between the 1970s and 1990s, when witnesses' voices became part of our memorial landscape. So, only after that, the voices were heard. That is when the time of testimony began. That is when people started writing, even though it was a past. And that is when their voices started becoming a memorial landscape. So this is very important. The timeline, why I want you to, I'm insisting on the year again and again, is that the timeline is, the mapping of the timeline is quite important because it starts only in 1961 after the trial of Eichmann, because that was televised and every period of time. And every day it was front page news across the world. And so that was also, that ignited the awareness, the public awareness of Holocaust worldwide. And now
it's Dr. Laura, your slides are moving, I think. You're in preparation and claims.
Okay.
So if you can, the students might want to see your slides. Is it?
1 second.
If it isn't a problem, could you just move it up a bit?
Yeah, there was only one slide after that. Are you able to see now? Maybe I'll stop. No, I'll stop sharing and then do.
Because there's a timeline you were talking about. I was thinking that.
No, I was only reading out. I will do it again.
Sorry, carry on if.
No. I've just stopped sharing so I can start again.
Yes.
One second. The public Eichmann trial, the public awareness of Holocaust?
No. We can see reparations and claims. No.
I don't know, maybe I'm... Satya, can you present? One second. Satya, you are there?
Yes, ma'am, I will present, ma'am.
Start from that slide. Preparation, the next one, after the next one. One second. I will just be talking till then. So you also have writing is quite important because, as I said, it was only after the public trial of Eichmann that people started knowing about Holocaust, and then you had a lot of testimonies coming in, and especially the most important testimony that actually shook the world was Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel, I'm just taking two people. They are so important for our discussion of peace. And so, especially when Elie Wiesel he's actually from Romania. Again, I want you at least to read 4 or 5 pages of what Elie Wiesel has written, because it is also a very, very lyrical piece of writing, despite the suffering. So, he is one person who is also very, very sensitive, and a person who also worked towards peace, because he has also got his Nobel Peace Prize in 1986, I think. So he was the one who wrote about the powerful peace, where he writes, never forget, his work is the night. He first wrote all that it was in his mind in 1956, and the title was "And the World Has Remained Silent." That was written in Yiddish. Yiddish is the language which most of the European Jews spoke at that point of time. So he wrote, and that ran up to some 800 pages. And then he also met a journalist in France. Then he was resettled. He was sent to a children's home in France, and he found out his two sisters. In the camp, his father died. His mother and younger sister was instantly taken for slaughter. So, but his father survived till the death march. But he perished they transported him to another. He was like he did not survive, and so now you see he writes very, very powerfully, and he wrote in French in 1958, and only in 1960 Night was published in English. So the first very few pages you hear these lines: "Never shall I forget that night, the first night in the camp that turned my life into night. 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. The smoke is the smoke from the furnace which was continuously burning. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever." So it was a very, very hard work, and also he also was feeling very traumatized by that. But then the volume of work he has written, 40 works, and in 40 works he has some of it memoirs, some is autobiography, and some of it are novels also. He is very, very important, not only for writing, testimonial writing. So narrating the whole post-Holocaust through writing is also important. Satya, can you change it into slideshow instead of putting it this? Okay. So the next one we will see is Simon Wiesenthal. Simon Wiesenthal is also a very, very important person. Why I have brought Simon Wiesenthal here is that he is someone who sunflower meant sunflower on the limits and possibilities of forgiveness, on the possibilities and limits of forgiveness. Again, this is very interesting because Elie Wiesel was also in Holocaust, and then when he was incarcerated, one day he was working actually inside a city, and that day he had to work in a hospital. So as he was working in a hospital, he was called by a nurse on duty, and then he asked her to come and meet a dying soldier. And this dying soldier was completely bandaged. You only saw his eyes here. There was nothing else. He was totally hidden. And Simon Wiesenthal had no idea why he was called to the bedside of a German soldier, a German dying soldier. And then this German soldier tells about his own story. He was continuously speaking. For him, it was kind of a release. And then he said, how he went into the Hitler's youth camp, how his mother didn't like it, but he was he was so inflamed with passion for the country, and he wanted to do, and he didn't, though he had to do a lot of things, and he shared everything. And finally, he said, we went to a place, and then we got news that 300 Jews were there in one building. They were hidden in one building. And then we had orders to shoot. We actually set fire to the house, and to make sure that all 300 died. And as we set fire to the house, children and women were jumping from it was a 3-story building. They were jumping from the story, the second and the third story, and we shot every one of them. And he was just 17-year-old boy. He was just a 17-year-old. And then he said, then there was a bomb blast. I was injured, and this has been in my heart. This has been in my heart for a very, very, and it has been, he's going to die, and he was a Catholic. And so he thought, I will not get a priest here. So I wanted a Jew so that he will ask, he will confess, and he will also have a kind of a forgiveness from him. And Simon Wiesenthal was so overcome by what he saw, because Karl, the German soldier, he had he had actually, given us such a story. Dr. Preeti, I think I will try again. Satyaseelan, you stop thing. I think she's not able to see. I will again try. I think it should be okay now for me. I will try. Can you just tell me, is it visible?
Yes, it is. Now it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Can you see Simon Wiesenthal? I think the title is kind of scrambled. It was actually published in German in 1969 and in English in 1970. Are you able to see the screen of Simon Wiesenthal?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, and he writes about it. He does not say a word, and he leaves the place because he felt it was not his prerogative to absolve or give forgiveness to a man on behalf of all Jews. So he left. But that will never go away from his mind. But after he survived, this soldier also left all his belongings to Simon Wiesenthal, and he was too surprised. But after the war, he went to see his mother. And then his mother was a devout Catholic. But she was very sad that he went and joined the Hitler Youth. But as he was talking to the mother, he realized that the mother would have been heartbroken had she known that her son was participated in the killing of innocent children and women. So he just gives the mother all his belongings and leaves without telling a word. He doesn't even tell that he's a Jew, a survivor. But then he comes back and a book on the possibilities and limits of forgiveness. He sends it to 53 people, and he's asking him, what would you have done? Is it right or not to forgive? So as we discussing about and Holocaust, this is a very, very hard question about, is it a victim of the Holocaust fell for another Jew? So this kind of peace there, and all an eternal is it that you were right in coming back silent. And some said maybe at least to let the wounded soul go, you should have forgiven. So you have a lot of for, against, ambivalent, and so you have these peace ambivalence. That is why I wanted to bring his work into the audience here. And also not only that, Simon Wiesenthal was also very important for another reason. He was one of the chief Nazi hunters. He went where it was his clue which he gave. He was the one who found out that Eichmann was in Argentina, and he sent his people to go and collect him. So Wiesenthal also rejected the concept of collective guilt, and that is why he also felt he cannot forgive for all the people. And he also, there were some Jews who went and killed the Germans, like for one, and he was against that. Even though they had suffered, he was